So this is the next part of my online curriculum, the Real Hiring Playbook. So in the first episode, we covered the first two here, which was how hiring decisions get made, and then recruiter versus hiring manager psychology. For this episode, what we're going to do, we're going to focus more on what internal conversations actually mean, and then also why timing and visibility matter, and things that you can do to maximize that timing and visibility. So taking you over to this screen here, as we can see, visibility does not mean posting on LinkedIn every day. It doesn't mean awkward networking, and it doesn't mean quote unquote pushing yourself. All it means, to put it very simply, is it means being familiar, being easy to remember, and making sure that when you're being discussed in the hiring process, you're the topic of conversation internally, and you're always keeping yourself on their minds. Moving down here, section 2. So, visibility before you apply. So what you want to do is, before your CV lands in a recruiter inbox, you want to make sure that you've identified the team members, because this is going to be very important when you're doing things like stalking their LinkedIn and making sure that you're a culture fit. But even more obviously important is that you're going to be able to engage them before you apply. And that way you won't be seen as a stranger. So what I recommend doing for this is you can comment thoughtfully on their posts, or you could literally just reach out to a key member of the team before you actually send your application. Or alternatively, what you can do is you can send that message directly after applying. I recommend either you look for a hiring manager, and then after you've done the hiring manager that you believe will be responsible for the job posting, you can then look for team members or potential team members, and you can then look for people that would be on your team should you be successful for that job role. And then all that's going to do is it's going to build on your visibility, so that the hiring managers and people in the team, they're already familiar with you before you've even stepped in an interview. And then it's just going to put you head and shoulders above the rest. So you've probably had an incident where you've had a previous interview and you've been rejected because there was a candidate that knew people on the hiring team. I want you to be that person, and this is how you can be that person. So you're not turning around and saying you're just unlucky. This is how you're going to create your own luck, which is gold. I wish someone told me this a few years ago. So yeah, as I've said here, you can do things like just asking an intelligent question. I always recommend, when you're going to open your messages with these people, I would always recommend that you try to look for a commonality that you have with these people. So it could be, for example, if you're really lucky, you might have gone to the same university or school in the past, or you might be in the same LinkedIn forum as well, because there's a lot of different forums and groups on LinkedIn. But essentially, you want to map out as many commonalities as you have before messaging. And then any commonalities you have is going to be dynamite. Because the way you have to think about it is, would they be more likely to reply to someone they know and they're familiar with? Or would they be more likely to reply to a stranger? It's most likely going to be someone that they're already at least somewhat familiar with. So bear that in mind when you're making your messages. It's the number one thing to improve your response rates is commonalities. I've tested this. Just take my word for it. Okay, move on to section 3. So you want to apply at the right moment. So this is where I talk about timing. So what I found, so I currently do applications for multiple clients. And what I found is that the best times to apply is these 3 here. So you want to apply it early in the week, early in the hiring cycle, and shortly after a role is posted. Now, how do you find these things? So obviously, Monday is early in the week. I don't have to explain that to you, hopefully. And then early in the hiring cycle, I recommend that you look at a website called Crunchbase. There's alternatives, I think Apollo's similar. But what you can do is you can actually look at when a company was recently funded if you're targeting startups. And then other signals that a company is early on in the hiring cycle is, if you just look at posts on LinkedIn, if you stalk a couple companies on LinkedIn, then you can see their posts. A lot of the times what will happen is senior members of the team would start posting, they'll start talking, they will just start posting a lot more, which is usually a signal that they could be hiring for new roles. either right now or coming up. But the number one way, I would say Crunchbase or Apollo, and then any companies that are recently funded are most likely going to be hiring aggressively because that is what companies typically do when they've just been funded. So the reason why you want to get the timing right in terms of getting early in the week, early in the hiring cycle, shortly after a role is posted, is because when we hit these three, we're going to end up with this. So basically, hiring managers are going to be a lot fresher. Fewer candidates are going to have been reviewed, and there's going to be less decision fatigue. Why this is important, fewer candidates being reviewed, is because the bar to entry, it always changes. So what I mean by that is what you would need to do as a candidate to be worthy of an interview is going to be different if you're the fifth person to apply versus where it's going to be if you're the 500th applicant to apply. So when the hiring manager gets their first batch of candidates, they're just going to pick up the first one or two or three that are the best out of that early bunch. If there were only 20 people to be in that first early bunch, your chances of being the best two or three is much higher than you being the best two or three out of the remaining 480 applicants. It's simple maths, but your chances are much higher if you are one of the first candidates because the bar to entry is going to be a lot lower. So please bear that in mind. And yeah, as I said here, there's less decision fatigue. So basically, just to put it in a nutshell, hiring managers they're just more fresh, they're less tired, they're less fed up with their lives, they've got a little bit more kick in their step. So you're just going to end up with better results the earlier you get in. So section 4, follow up that creates visibility. So most follow-ups are ignored because they're generic. If you're following up and you're getting aired, it's probably because they're generic. So examples are going to be things like you're just checking in on your application, which I've seen a lot. And I've put this in because this is actually what I used to say verbatim, and it's kind of cringy now. But I mean, it's still better than nothing. As long as you're not saying nothing, it's still better than nothing. But I mean, we can do better. It's 2026. We can do better than this. So good follow-up would be something like referencing the team's work, referencing a conversational post, or and basically signal alignment and not desperation. So I think what I learned, because I actually learned this when I used to do sales, but when you're following up, you always want to follow up with value. If we're referencing the team's work or referencing a conversational post, there's some sort of value outside of where is my application at. So that's what you want to do. You want to kind of come in with some kind of value. Maybe drop in an insight based on a colleague's post or work that you've seen them doing recently. Just something with value, and that will go a long way into getting your follow-ups actually replied to you. And this section 5, so interview visibility, and this is a massive one. I'm going to keep drilling down on how important interview performance is because a lot of people get things like this wrong. But in interviews, your job is not just to answer questions. I have seen interview recordings from clients, and I think everyone's doing this, which is why a lot of people are struggling. But what's happening is when you're getting questions in interviews, you're answering questions too literally. So you want to make it easy for someone to say that they liked you. So what I would say is just verbalize the things that you're thinking. You want to narrate the decisions you've made. That's why it really pays to learn your star stories I've talked about in previous videos. Learn it off the back of your hand so that when it comes to interview prep, you can actually verbalize that interview visibility, and then it's going to do so much for your chances. And this is the most important one, but you want to connect your experience to their problems so that people actually can see you as someone that can actually solve their problems, which is essentially why they're hiring in the first place. So for section 6, this is all about post-interview memory anchors. So this is all just about being memorable for the right reasons. So what I would do is I always say, a lot of people don't do this as well, but always send a short follow-up that just essentially will reinforce fit, and it highlights a clear strength that you have. And when you highlight your strength and you construct your emails, always tie it to team goals. So you don't want to just talk about yourself. You just want to explain that based on this thing that you probably already highlighted in your interview, based on your one clear strength, you can essentially fulfill the team's current needs. That's all you have to focus on in there. But always make sure you're following up because quite frankly, a lot of recruiters will just forget you, but not because they're nasty people, but just because they're interviewing so many people. They're only human and they can only remember so many people. So you'd be surprised how far just sending follow-ups can get you. So section 7. So this is going to be kind of a hard one, but basically, sometimes you can do everything right and you can still fail. It's okay. It is okay. But the main thing is, as long as you're getting the numbers, you're going to be fine. But sometimes there is just an internal candidate. I'm trying to make you that internal candidate, which is the purpose of this video. But sometimes, even when you do that, there's another internal candidate who has a history, years of relationship with the hiring team. Not much can be changed there. What I've seen quite often are these two. So sometimes companies can be a bit annoying, especially if you have startup companies. A lot of the times, what can happen is they can shift focus, and sometimes the urgency of the role can change. I've also seen cases where they've changed the scope of a role. So what that means is you might be in an interview for a particular role, but then because they've changed the scope of the role, you don't actually fit that role anymore. So you kind of get shifted out of the interview process, and then they start looking for different kind of profiles that fit. But all that to say that essentially sometimes timing is just a little bit against you. So don't take it to heart if that happens and you're not able to get a role or an interview. Just do if you do things correctly for long enough, you're gonna get your job. Don't worry about it. Don't you worry about that at all. So then moving on to the last point. So the core principle that I want you to take away, just remember this, is hiring managers, I'm going to speak about this till we're all blue in the face, but they're going to optimize for what feels familiar, what feels safe, and what feels easy to justify. If we can essentially hit all three of these pillars, then we're going to do very well. So that's me for that video. I'm going to catch you in the next one. Also, I do one-to-ones as well. So if you want any kind of help with your job applications, I'm probably going to leave a link for you to book in, and then we can actually just speak for like 15 minutes, half an hour, and see what your problems are.